Shalom Aleichem Rabotai, this is Rabbi Kovacs. Yesterday, Mishnah Yomi began the fourth parak of Shabbos, and today, God willing, we're finishing the fourth parak of Shabbos and moving on to the fifth parak. There's actually only two Mishnayos in the fourth parak of Shabbos about insulation, hot mana, the act of insulating hot food on Shabbos. So as we mentioned yesterday, we forbid insulating on Erev Shabbos with any material that adds heat, as a gezerah that he might use coals or something that's fire-related and stoke the coals or blow on them and add heat, havara and bishul, on Shabbos itself. Great, so let's move on to Mishnah Bet, kind of about the muktzeh implications here. Tomnin bishlachin, you can insulate your pot with leather spreads, leather hides. These have another use. Metal talinotan, you can use them. They're not muktzeh. You can move them around. You can sit on them, put them on the couch. Begizet sem, or you can insulate with wool shearings that you get from your friendly neighborhood sheep. But these, the ein metal talinotan, you can't actually move these by hand because wool shearings are used to spin thread. So they're muktzeh, they're set aside for a non-Shabbostika usage. So what do you do if you put your pot inside of wool shearings to keep it warm? Notel etekisei, so just lift off the lid, no float, and the wool falls off the lid. Now you may be familiar with the concept of basis, a base. If something is holding muktzeh on top of it, it might also become forbidden to move. But this pot lid with the wool shearings on top of it, it's not designed or set aside to serve the wool shearings. It's not a wool shearings holder. It's a pot lid. It's here to serve the pot, that Tiferes Yisrael points out. So it does not become a basis to the wool. So you could pick up the pot lid and the wool just falls off. Then you can access your food. Now the Mishnah continues, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah Omer Kupa, this box. So what's going on? If there's the Feldheim Mishnayos has a picture here, the illustrated Mishnayos. He's got a box full of wool shearings with a pot inside. Mata al tzida v'notel, tilt it on the side and then take out the pot or take out the food. Shema yitol v'enu yachol achzir, because you might take it out, but you can't put it back. So what's going on? Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah points out there's a problem if the pot is in the middle of wool shearings and you pull out the pot, then the wool shearings might sort of collapse and fill up that hole, and then you can't put the pot back because you're effectively moving muktzeh. Sages say you could take out the pot and put it back. This is, again, assuming those wool shearings did not collapse in and fill in the little hole where that pot used to be. Now, the last part of this Mishnah states, Lo kislechem yibad yom, if you had not covered up the food when it's still daytime, meaning before Shabbos, before Shkia, lo yichasena mishatechshach. You can't insulate it and cover it up after Shkia. The reasoning we mentioned yesterday is we don't let you do any hatmana insulation on Shabbos itself, because you might find, well, it's not so hot, and you might turn up the burner or stoke the coals or end up doing some sort of bishul or malacha on Shabbos. Kisahu, he had already covered it at Erev Shabbos, Vinit Gola, and then it got uncovered by accident. Mutar l'ksaita, you go ahead and cover it again. We're worried about the changing the temperature at that moment of first covering it on Shabbos. Memole etzikitan, you can fill up your jug of water. Benotin latachat kar, you can put it under your pillow, o latachat keset, or under your something bigger than a car, says the Bartner, like a cushion or a couch cushion or something like this, or a big throw pillow or something similar. So the idea here is this was mutter to do even on Shabbos because it's cold water and you're just trying to keep it a nice normal temperature, or you're just trying to take off the chill. You're not trying to make it hot. You're not trying to keep it hot. So there's no gezerah about doing it on Shabbos itself. On to chapter hay. And it's a good way to remember, chapter hay is about animals that eat hay. So, b'mei behema yotza, b'ma ena yotza. With what accessories or items can an animal go outside on Shabbos, and with what can't they go outside? So what's going on is we're going back to Mishnah Aleph, where we talked about hotzah, changing rishus, moving objects from one rishus to another, or carrying an object for amos in rishus rabim. So if an animal is carrying something, that's a problem, because again, your animals are commanded to rest on the Sabbath, as we discussed in the first parak, because of machlokus beis Shammai beis Hillel. So we can't have them carrying stuff. But what if it's stuff that they're kind of wearing instead of carrying? So that's what this parak is going to talk about. Yotzei gamol be'afsar. Your camel can go out with the afsar. This is a curb or a rope tied around the mouth, says the Bartanura, v'naka bechotam. And the naka, this apparently is the naka levana. This is some sort of more aggressive, more wild camel, and the Gemara says it's the white ones, which are especially dangerous. So they'd put a ring through their nostrils, and you would tie a rope through this. Instead of a collar, which gives some control, a nose ring gives quite a lot more control over the animal, which is necessary for this naka levona, which is a dangerous animal if it's not under control. So it's normal for it to have this nose ring in, as that's sort of the collar for the animal. The lubdikis be perumbia, and the lubdikis, which apparently is the Libyan donkey, can go with a prumbia. Now this is sort of a piece of metal that goes in between the teeth. Like, I think it's a bridle bit or a bridle or something like this, and it's tied around, so you have a rope tied around the mouth and going through the loops that are in this bit that's in the mouth, and that's also a way to control the animal, because this Libyan donkey is particularly stubborn and strong and obnoxious and hard to control without this. So again, it's considered a normal worn item. Instead of a carried item, it's a worn item for this donkey. V'sus b'sher, and the sus can go out with his collar or chain around the neck. V'chol ba'alei sher, yatzin b'sher, and namshachin b'sher, and anything that normally has a collar and a leash, it can go out and be pulled with the collar and the leash. The Barner explains, if you're not holding the animal by the leash, you could just wrap the leash around the neck of the dog or the horse or whatever it is, and if it's just following you, it's no big deal. It's not considered carrying an item, because this is a normal thing that the animal wears, is that collar with the leash attached. And you do hazah on it and tevila in the mikveh, even when they're still attached to the animal. Now here we're not talking about hilchos Shabbos, we're talking about hilchos if it got tame. So how does an animal's accessories or clothing get tame? Well, really the collar and the leash are for human use. A dog doesn't need a collar unless it's a pet, and a horse doesn't need a lead and a collar unless you want to ride it. So these things can get tame. If they get tame mace, they need hazah shlishi shvi. They need hazah sprinkling with the paraduma water, the mechatas on day 3 and day 7. They need tevila in the mikveh. So you could technically take your horse or your dog into the mikveh. I do not advise you try this lamaisa here in Baltimore, but technically, when we are in Yerushalayim, b'meherav menu, we have a base of mikdash, and your horse leash and collar get tame. You could take your horse down into the mikveh if you got the mikveh big enough. Now, as a reminder, we don't paskin from Mishnayos, but since it comes up, you can walk a dog on Shabbos using a collar and a leash. And of course, there's no issue at all when you're inside the Eruv. However, outside the Eruv, there are potential issues. And the poskim say if you have some leash coming out the back of your hand, it might look like you're carrying something. So they say be careful not to have 3 tefachim, which is about 10 inches, or some say 1 tefach, about 3 inches, not to have that coming out the back. So you don't want to hold the leash in the middle and have some leash, falling out of the back of your hand that looks like carrying. So that's one thing to be aware of. And also outside of the Eruv, you don't want the leash to sag and be close to the ground, either within 3 tefachim, according to some poskim, or 1 tefach. I've heard Rav Avadi Yosef says 1 tefach, about 3 inches, or about your tefach, so you measure with your hands. Don't have the leash go that far down, drooping on the ground, because it looks like you're dragging something on the ground, which is usher on Shabbos. So if your leash is not too long, or your dog is not too close, that your leash drags on the ground, you keep it taut. You don't let it go slack, and you don't have it coming out of the back of your hand. Then yes, it is still mutter to walk the dog outside of the Eruv on Shabbos. And again, this is based on the OU website and Rav Avadi's psak about the dogs. I'm not making any of this up. I'm not passing from the Mishnah. Shkach Rabosai Zai Gesund.